Thank you all for joining me today. I'm really pleased to be joined by a fantastic panel offering different perspectives on the realities and the importance of diversity in international arbitration, and in particular gender diversity. We have Christiane Deniger, who is Vice President at Litigation Fund of Burford. Christiane previously practiced in international arbitration at Fried Frank and Dewey LeBeuf, and she is also very active in Burford's Equity Project, which is an award-winning initiative to improve gender and racial diversity in the business of law by addressing the persistent gap in senior levels at law firms. We also have Juliana Janku, who is a partner at Anosia Vandenberg and has acted as arbitrator, counsel, and tribunal secretary on many, many cases. Her arbitration experience includes disputes involving both states and private parties, as well as various procedural and substantive laws. And lastly, we have Daniela Smith, who is EMEA General Counsel and Claims Officer for Euclid Transactional, a global managing general agency specializing in the underwriting of representations and warranties, tax liability, and contingent liability. Prior to joining Euclid, and I promise there's no bias here, Daniela was a legal director with me at Addleshaw in our international arbitration group in London. Christiane, why do you think it's important for us to see more female arbitrators?
Well, outside of the obvious, I was very fortunate in that I started my career working for a female partner who made it her mission over 15 years ago to ensure that there was always some diversity reflected in any sort of arbitral tribunal choice that we were putting forward to our clients. So I grew up in law with that in mind. And I've seen different reactions to that at different law firms and with different clients. But as we're moving to a place where we're having more senior women as partners in the arbitral world and in-house, we're seeing people want themselves reflected in their panels. And to mirror what Daniela said, there have been studies that have suggested that a more diverse panel are more prepared, more task-oriented, and lead to a more attentive tribunal for the parties in general. And what we've seen internally with our own data that Burford has collected over the last 10 years is that with an increase in representation on panels, we're seeing happier clients on both sides because we are not seeing the same being put forward.
Great, thank you. And Juliana, in your practice as a practitioner, but also in private practice, but also as an arbitrator, have you seen a change in the volume of appointments of women as arbitrators in recent years?
Yes, thank you, Natalie. I did. There has been a slow and steady increase of women appointed as arbitrators, which is, of course, good news. And I fully agree with what has been said before me, that if you have a more diverse tribunal, this will help the tribunal get a more well-rounded view of the case and to bring to the fore different perspectives, as opposed to having the same uniform perspective and not anticipating perhaps some issues that can come up. The increase has been steady, but not terribly fast either. What I have seen is that in perhaps the lower value cases or medium value cases, we see more and more women. But also from discussing with colleagues in the higher value cases where the stakes are immense, the progress is a little bit slower, I would think. And it's also important that I think there's still a marked discrepancy in terms of who is making these appointments. Is it the institution or is it the parties? So I think there's a lot of room for progress to be made from the users of arbitration, actually having been acquainted with more diverse arbitrators after the institutions have made the appointments. So actually to play their part in this system.
I think it's something that is on everybody's agenda now, and I think almost all companies, I'd be surprised if it's not something that people are thinking about when they're appointing arbitrators and appointing counsel. I think it's something that you want to see, and like we're saying about wanting to appoint people in your likeness. I think I've had a lot more experience since I've gone in-house of being the only woman on a call or the only woman in a meeting. And actually I do feel more comfortable sometimes when I'm not the only woman. I think it's nice to have someone else that you can see.
Christian, from a funder's perspective, how important, how involved do you get in ensuring that arbitral tribunals are diverse, or at least the candidates, the shortlist is diverse?
So obviously acknowledging that as a funder, we have no control over any of our funded cases. We do ask that our clients let us know who their tribunal potential selections are from a conflict standpoint, but it also allows us to encourage, so again, not choose, encourage deeply that we have not just the pale, stale male group of same people appointed on a regular basis. And we've been fortunate enough, or we've seen a vast increase in the last few years of female candidates being appointed, or at least being put on the selection shortlist, which is better than nothing. But we want to see more. We obviously need to see more diverse panels, and we are doing everything we can to help that and push that along through our own internal incentives. And we think it's important to make this change, and not just through the arbitral institutions appointing women themselves. We want claimants and respondents to start doing it off their own back.
So from a corporate perspective, do you think there is a greater awareness of and a focus on the need for more female arbitrators?
I think it's something that all businesses are thinking about a lot more. It's difficult because when you're going to appoint an arbitrator, it's such a huge, important decision. And I think the discussions that go on is that you want a safe pair of hands, who's going to be the most experienced, who have similar companies used before, who we used before. And if generally those most experienced people are going to be sort of the men, aren't they? Like generally the older arbitrators, more experienced arbitrators than the men. And so I think it's important that we have to challenge ourselves to look, just because someone has done more arbitrations doesn't mean that they are going to be the best person to use. And to make sure that you broaden who you're thinking about. And I have to admit, like, as a woman, I like to see other women who are representing us, whether that's as counsel, whether an arbitrator. And I think sometimes the question if that is sort of the right gut feeling, but I've had really good experiences working with sort of other women, and I think it is important to promote that. And yeah, I think it's something that all businesses are working towards, and it's just not just putting them on your shortlist, but making sure that actually they're top of the list.
And then lastly, I was going to ask each of you, what can we all do, and who should be doing it to make the situation better, to engender more balance? Maybe if we start with you, Juliana.
I think we all have a role to play in this, in every single decision that we make. So arbitrator appointment is obviously the first place to start. And for counsel, I think, when they do put together a diverse list of potential arbitrators, they should throw their weight behind all the names that are on that list. Even if the men have more arbitrator appointments, they should emphasize that the women who have fewer, for obvious reasons, they have the tools, they have the experience, and they have the qualities that they need to be an excellent arbitrator. But I think it goes down to everything that we do. It goes to promoting talent within the firms that we work with, to retain talent, to mentor younger people, to give opportunities to women on task forces, at conferences, in projects, to think of women for all sorts of opportunities that arise, because essentially this is the primary driver of appointments, is for people to know women as talented lawyers, and that requires visibility. So in every project that we undertake, we should think of women, talented women that we can name for those projects.
Thank you. And Christian, the same to you.
I could not agree more with what Juliana just said. Both clients, as well, corporates as well as litigation funders, can do so much in this sphere with reinforcing and supporting women in law generally. and can reinforce diversity in arbitration by encouraging and sponsoring initiatives, undertaken by other stakeholders. One thing that we have at Burford Capital, which Nathalie mentioned earlier, is the Equity Project, which was born out of noticing that less than 5% of cases brought to us for consideration of funding are led by women partners, which is horrific. So in 2019, we ring-fenced $50 million to support women in law. That was committed very quickly, and late last year, we committed an additional $100 million to support women and racially diverse people in law. And when any case is funded that meets that criteria, Burford will then donate a percentage of any proceeds we receive to a charity supporting racially or female women in law. And we think this is important because it incentivizes the firms and the corporates and everyone to consider who they're appointing and what position they can play within this circumstance.
Super, thank you. And Daniela, how about you?
I think Laura's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because there are so many junior women. I think I'm right that at least in England, the percentage of female trainees is more heavily weighted towards women. Then it's as you get more senior, and it's it's the senior women who are going to be arbitrators. So I think it's about encouraging women to the profession, but it's then keeping them. And to be it's extremely hard work to be a female partner in a law firm or to be a female arbitrator. And I think it's up to the whole profession, to clients, to support those women. So, for example, when women come back from maternity leave, that's extremely difficult, and it's keeping people going, encouraging them, talking about how hard it can be, what the challenges are. Really keeping everyone in the profession so that they can reach the top stages where they become an arbitrator. I think that is one of the really key things, is looking at why is it that women leave, and trying to address that as well. And the other thing I think is really important is having role models. So there's some fantastic female arbitrators around there, and I've been lucky to meet some of them, have round tables or lunches with them, and I think that is so important and inspiring to have those role models out there as well.
Jamie Harrison is here today, and he is a Deputy Director General of the LCIA, having previously set up Addleshaw Goddard's Singapore office. No bias here, I promise. Jamie has experience of international arbitration all over the world. In addition to Singapore and London, Jamie has experience of arbitration in Hong Kong, Paris, and Geneva. So, Jamie, why do you think it's important for us to have more female arbitrators?
Thank you, Nathalie. Well, thank you for asking me to join in, and I think I am the token male on your panel, which is also reassuring. I think it's probably for the same reasons that it's important that we are diverse across all sorts of businesses and ways of life. That it is only by having a diverse panel that we achieve a representative outcome. That we hear all sides, and we appreciate the way that cases are put and evidence comes out, and we see it from all sides. And I think that diversity generally, not just gender diversity, is crucial to achieving that in arbitration, obviously in all walks of life.
And following the pledge and the ICA report, do you think you've seen a change in the volume of appointments of women as arbitrators?
I think the LCIA has seen a pretty stratospheric change in that respect. I think we have benefited from the fact that our Director General is female, and was very high profile in the forming of the pledge and the promotion of the pledge around in law firms and in other institutions. And I think that we've become pretty synonymous with a diverse appointments process for arbitrators. The numbers, the data is quite stark, I think, and if you can forgive me for just looking at my notes, but between 2015 and 2020, the change has been quite phenomenal. So in 2015, the total number of appointments in LCIA arbitration. So this is data which relates to arbitrations under the LCIA rules that we administer. We do administer other arbitrations, but if we limit ourselves to those where the parties have chosen LCIA rules, in 2015 there were 449, and in 2020 there were 533 total appointments during that period. And in 2015, out of 449, 71 were female, and in 2020, out of the 533, 175 were female. So the difference, the percentage of females in 2015 was 15.8, roughly 16%, and by 2020 it was 33%. So effectively, it had doubled in that 5-year period. Obviously, great strides have been taken. We still are only at 33%, but at least that shows you an improvement, massive improvement year on year. Of course, those are total number of appointments, and I'm sure we'll get on to the subject of what drags down those numbers, because I think if you look at the total number of appointments by the LCIA court, as opposed to nominations by parties, for example, the picture is more rosy from the institution's perspective than it is from the party's perspective, and I think that's probably, I mean, clearly that's a key theme for this discussion. But if the numbers are haven't risen as fast as one might have hoped, then I think probably there is as much to say about the users of arbitration as there is about the institutions themselves.
Well, it does. Thank you very much. Lead on to my next question. What a surprise! Which is, I know that institutions are focusing on this, and this is something that's important to institutions. And in some ways, they are at greater liberty to push for this change. With regards to party-appointed arbitrators, do you think that it is because practitioners are wary of appointing lesser known or even unknown arbitrators, or is it that corporate clients are not pushing for this enough? What do you think are the reasons why it's the institutions that are leading the way rather than practitioners?
I think it's probably a mixture of both. I think the on your first point, I was trying to look in my notes, but there's some quite interesting data on reappointments. And I think once female arbitrators are appointed, they tend or can be reappointed. So the numbers on reappointment are also quite stark. So in 2020, I'm sorry if I'm bombarding you with numbers, but we're putting together the annual report at the moment, and I happen to have them at my fingertips. But 45% of all appointments in 2020 involved repeat appointments. So it's evident that there are more women who are appointed repeatedly than men who are appointed repeatedly. So in proportion with the total number of male appointments, 35.7% of all appointments of men in 2020 were repeat performance, so 35.7%, whereas 60% of all appointments of women in 2020 were repeat appointments. So I think there may be something in your query as to whether or not we're diffident about sticking our toe in the water of appointing female arbitrators, but once we do, we see the benefit of it, and we see the respect that they do very well. I think clearly that is promoted. That sort of reappointment is promoted more by the parties than it is by the institution. I think we'd be very clear that the same appointment criteria will apply in each separate case. So it must be the parties' nominations or even the arbitration agreement, which is pointing us towards a particular type of arbitrator, as opposed to the institution trying to sort of manipulate the reappointment numbers.
I'm thrilled to hear that the data reveals that women are better arbitrators than men.
I didn't say better. I said more prevalent. It will be interesting to know, actually. I mean, you raise an interesting question, because I think one of the things that we don't explore, and we're often asked about the data on the success of or the number of awards that are challenged, for example, and whether those come from a particular type of arbitrator, whether they're single arbitrators or tribunal of three, whether they're English language arbitrators, whether they're established names, or whether they're female. We don't have that kind of data on, or we don't have reliable data really on what happens on challenges. But I think it would be quite interesting to know whether that statistic reveals who's better.
Do you think, therefore, it's for the institutions to take on more of a role in giving women their first big break, in order for parties to see the work that's done and to have confidence in the work that's done, but also to give the women a track record?
I guess that's true. I mean, to the extent that we can give female arbitrators a nudge or a more prominence, then I think that probably it is the right answer. I mean, we implement our diversity goals really through the appointment process, if we have diversity goals, but those kind of aims come through the appointment procedures. So an internal list of candidates that's sent to the president or the vice presidents of the LCA court are inclusive, and they include candidates from diverse backgrounds, not just gender diverse, but we are as diverse as possible. And without straying off the point, I mean, of course, you will be well aware that it is the parties that nominate, if they nominate, but it is the LCA court that appoints. So ultimately, it is in the power of the LCA court to determine some of these outcomes. The LCA database of potential arbitrators is refreshed and replenished frequently, and we make sure that the pool of arbitrators, which isn't a panel in the same way as many institutions, so there again, we're not handpicking arbitrators. You can send us your CV. Anybody can send us their CV to be part of that pool. And the intention in having that pool should be that it is as diverse as possible. We encourage all CVs. As I say, we don't vet CVs, and therefore, we keep it as inclusive as possible. We are gender neutral when we communicate about arbitrator appointments. There's no presumption that it will necessarily be male or female, but we're strictly gender neutral. And of course, it does lend us quite a lot of power, this process. So the LCIA selects about 50% of the arbitrators that ultimately are appointed. The parties nominate, but our secretariat is responsible for putting together a proposed list of arbitrators that goes ultimately to the president or a vice president of the court for appointment and for validation. Of course, it is worth remembering that the secretariat is headed by a female registrar. There's a female deputy registrar, and in fact, the number of staff in female staff in leading positions in the LCA is very striking. There are 10 female staff out of 11 of the senior positions in the LCIA. You can guess who the other one is.
Okay, so I have today with us, we have Krina Baltag, who is Associate Professor at Stockholm University and has extensive international commercial and investment arbitration experience. Krina is also a member of the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce Arbitration Institute Board and has been appointed in numerous arbitrations as sole arbitrator and as co-arbitrator. Krina is Vice Chair of the Academic Council and member of the Executive Committee of the Institute for Transnational Arbitration, member of the Executive Committee of the Rising Arbitrators Initiative, and co-chair of Racial Equality for Arbitration Lawyers. Krina is here today to share with us some of what the SEC has been looking into and found, as well as what the SEC is doing in relation to gender diversity. Gender equality, at least within arbitral tribunals, has been an area of some focus over the last few years. And we have seen a number of initiatives focused on highlighting the need for that greater gender equality. And arbitral institutions are very focused on what the data reveals and what the institutions can do to help address the situation.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. That's a very kind introduction on your part, and I'm very happy and grateful to be here with you today.
Thank you. I'll hand over to you, Leonor.
So we would be really interested in hearing from you on what the SCC has been doing. If we understood correctly, there's you've been looking at this issue of more equal gender representation on tribunals, and maybe you could tell us a bit more about what your studies have revealed.
Indeed, and just one thing to mention, that the SCC and Stockholm and the arbitration community in Sweden is very much part of this wider initiative to bring diversity or to enhance diversity or recognize diversity in international arbitration. So it's not something that the SCC does it on its own. I think all the arbitration institutions are doing their best. So the SSC, first of all, it's working hard on ensuring diversity, but I think we all pay attention to numbers. And what the SSC did last year was to release a report on diversity in arbitration, and it looked at the appointments between 2015 and 2019, which made up of 1,251 appointments of arbitrators. In 690 disputes, half of them being international. And it looked at diversity from the perspective of age, gender, nationality, and repeat appointments, because this comes to the discussion of intersectionality, in particular when it comes to gender and age. So I think this is where the SSC I brought something really interesting, because as I said, when you look at the numbers, you can take something from this and maybe move forward with a more focused plan. I'm happy to speak about the numbers if you'd like, or
Sure.
Well, one thing that is striking is that and one thing that has to be mentioned is arbitration institutions, they come into the scene in a very small number of cases to make appointments. So their intervention, as I said, when it comes to diversity or to enhance diversity, is quite limited to those situations where, for example, the SCC board has the default role of appointing the chairs in the SCC arbitration proceedings, but it may be that the parties would decide on a different procedure for the appointment of the chair, and therefore the default role of the SCC board is not in place. So from the 1,251 appointments that I mentioned that the study looks at, the SCC board made appointments in 35% of the cases, which I think it's a good number, but as I said, it's quite low to have a real impact. Now, when it comes to statistics, this 1,251 cases between 2015 and 2019 had as arbitrators 80% men and 20% women. And I think you'll say, wow, this is not good, but it's better than you think, because it shows a progression. These are in absolute, this is the average, obviously, but when you look at the progression and how we evolved from 2015 to now, there is a significant increase. And I think we need to be happy when there is an increase when we're talking about such a complex and sensitive issue. But we had in 2015, 13% of women. So to reach 20%, and even in 2019, we had 23%. So it is an increase in reflecting at least gender diversity in arbitration proceedings when it comes to the appointment of arbitrators. So we're looking here at the total number of cases and not what the SSC board has appointed. But when you look at what the SCC board tried to do in the 35% of this 1,251 cases, the SCC board appointed 30% of the arbitrators women. So it's definitely above the average. And it's definitely more than what the parties did, because the parties appointed women in 14% of the cases. So it's double. We work harder than the parties, at least in this respect. And I think these results are in line with the ICA task force of 2020. And it shows really, first of all, the difference between what the institutions are trying to do and what parties can do a bit more.
I guess, thank you. And going back to basics, why is it important to have female arbitrators?
Well, it is important for all the reasons that we need to have diversity in arbitration. We have diverse cases coming from all over the world. Our clients or users of arbitration, if they're corporations, you see the CEOs of corporations are women. It's very difficult to see in an arbitration a full a male panel when you have at the two ends two CEOs, wonderful, successful women representing the users in the arbitration. So it's for the same reason why we need to ensure gender, age, racial, intersectionality in international arbitration. I think the age and gender are probably the low-hanging fruit for diversity. I think it's easier to achieve that without spending too much time perhaps to define what diversity is or what is racial diversity. You know, that we have this gender diversity and age diversity. And the other point is that we know that arbitrators are selected and appointment in the view of the case. You can have two exceptional male and a man and woman arbitrator who are equally qualified for that specific case. Why not trying to bring exactly this diversity in the arbitration panel?